The air was crisp that morning, the kind that smells faintly of pine sap and cold water, with a thin fog curling over the surface of the lake like it was trying to keep secrets. I was on the dock, coffee in one hand and fishing rod in the other, savoring the silence. Then I heard the crunch of gravel, sharp and deliberate, the kind of footsteps belonging to someone on a mission. I turned just in time to see her, Karen, heavy-set, chin lifted like she was the sheriff of these hills, cardigan straining against her shoulders as she marched down my path without so much as a glance at the private property sign. She didn't stop until she was right in my face, her perfumia thick, cloying floral cutting through the fresh mountain air like a knife. "You can't fish here without a permit," she declared, like she was delivering a divine edict. I blinked, unsure whether to laugh or ask if she was lost. She didn't give me the chance. "This lake belongs to the HOA, and as the chair of the Community Compliance Committee, I'm authorized to issue citations for illegal activity." I looked over my shoulder at the still water, where my lure floated lazily. "Illegal activity?" I said slowly. "This lake." She crossed her arms. "Yes, and unless you have a valid permit, I'm going to have to call the sheriff. And no, you can't just buy one on the spot, I have to approve it." That was the moment I knew exactly what kind of morning it was going to be. Karen wasn't here for a conversation, she was here to flex whatever little power she thought she had. I set down my coffee, my mind flipping through decades of family history like a well-worn photo album. My great-grandfather had bought this land back in 1924, 40 acres of untouched mountain valley, the lake included. It had been passed down through the generations, deed intact, boundaries surveyed and recorded in the county archives. The HOA didn't even exist until the late 80s, when a developer built vacation cabins a mile down the road. They had no jurisdiction here. None. "I don't need a permit," I said finally, keeping my voice calm. "Because this lake doesn't belong to the HOA, it belongs to me." Her laugh was sharp and ugly. "Oh, that's rich. You own this lake." She looked around like she was expecting an audience, then snorted. "You probably own a rowboat and a six-pack of beer. I've been on the board for 7 years. I know every square foot of community property." She had no idea how wrong she was. Still, I decided to let her walk herself into the trap. "If you're so sure, go ahead," I said. "Call the sheriff." She didn't hesitate, flipping open her phone and putting it on speaker. Her voice turned sugary sweet as she reported, "A suspicious man trespassing and fishing without a permit," throwing in a few choice phrases like "possibly armed" and "acting aggressively." My hands tightened on the dock rail. That was more than just a lie, it was the kind of lie that could get someone hurt. 15 minutes later, the distant hum of an engine floated over the ridge. Karen was standing tall, lips pursed, like she was about to collect a trophy. The sheriff's SUV pulled up, and out stepped not just the sheriff but his Deputian old friend of mine named Luke, who'd spent his childhood summers swimming in this very lake. The moment his eyes met mine, they lit up. "Evan? What the hell, long time no see." His gaze slid to Karen, who was already launching into her speech about protecting community resources. Luke listened patiently, then asked her for the exact location of the property. She rattled it off. He raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, you're aware that parcel is registered to the Miller family, right?" She blinked. "That's impossible. This is HOA land." He pulled a tablet from the cruiser, tapped a few times, and turned the screen toward her. "County records say otherwise. This whole Valley Lake include this private. Always has been. Always will be." I could almost see the blood drain from her face, like a bucket of cold water had been poured over her. But Luke wasn't done. "And since you're on posted land without permission, you're technically trespassing." She sputtered. "Enothis is a mistake. The HOA has no authority here." Luke cut in. Then, with a grin, he added, "Hell, Evan owns more land up here than the HOA's entire jurisdiction combined." Karen's voice faltered. "You can't own a whole valley." That's when I reached into my pack and pulled out the original land grant, laminated for preservation, the county seal still visible. I handed it to Luke, who turned it so she could see. "This says otherwise," he said. She stared at it like it might burst into flames in her hands. And that's when the twist hit. Luke glanced at her again, then asked casually, "Karen, didn't I see your name come up in a complaint about harassing the Johnson kids at the South Cabin last month?" Her eyes widened. That was different. But he was already speaking into his radio, requesting confirmation. Moments later, the dispatcher confirmed Karen was under investigation for multiple harassment reports filed by HOA and non-HOA residents alike. The sheriff took a step forward. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately. And consider yourself warned. Any more false reports, and you'll be facing charges." She stood frozen for a beat, then spun on her heel and stomped back up the gravel path, muttering curses under her breath. The moment she was out of sight, Luke chuckled. Some people never learn. But as I watched her retreat, I knew this wasn't over. People like Karen didn't back down. After one loss they regrouped, found another angle, came back swinging. The difference this time? She'd made the mistake of trying to pick a fight on my ground, my lake, my valley, and now the whole town knew it. Karen's retreat that morning was only the first ripple of a storm she was about to stir up. I didn't hear from her for a few days, but word traveled fast in small towns, and soon I started getting texts from friends telling me she was making the rounds at HOA meetings, spinning some wild tale about me illegally seizing community water. She'd even brought a printout of a fake HOA jurisdiction map she must have slapped together on her home computer. Her problem was, people here had long memories. The Johnsons, the very family Luke mentioned, were still bitter from the time she tried to fine them for hanging a hammock between two pine trees. The Coopers remembered her calling code enforcement because their kids were playing too loudly in the yard. Each story she told in those meetings only reminded people of the dozens of times she'd meddled in their lives. Still, she wasn't about to give up. A week later, I woke to the low growl of an ATV engine and stepped outside to see Karen and two other HOA board members on my property, clipboards in hand. They were pacing along my shoreline, pointing at random spots as if collecting evidence. I walked down the hill slowly, my phone recording in my jacket pocket. "Morning," I called, voice neutral. "Can I help you?" Karen didn't miss a beat. "We're conducting an environmental inspection," she said with exaggerated authority. "We have reason to believe this lake is being used in violation of HOA water quality standards." The two men with her looked less certain than she did, avoiding my eyes. "You're on private property," I said, stepping closer. "And you're trespassing. Again." One of the men mumbled something about thinking this was community land. That's when I pulled out the laminated land grant and held it up like a shield. "You see this? This is older than the HOA, older than the cabins you live in, older than you even being in this valley. You don't have the right to step 1 foot here." I could see the cracks in her confidence, but she doubled down. "This isn't over. We'll get a court order." She tried to push past me toward the dock, but that was her last mistake of the day. A shadow moved at the edge of the trees, and Luke emerged with another deputy. Turns out, after our last encounter, he'd set up a few trail cameras along my property line to catch poachers and trespassers. They'd picked up Karen and her crew crossing onto my land that morning, which meant they were already on their way when I stepped outside. "Ma'am," Luke said as he approached, "I told you last time, stay off this property. Now you've ignored that warning, and you're here with two witnesses who had no idea they were trespassing. That's criminal trespass and harassment." Her face flushed deep red, and she stammered something about performing her duties. Luke just shook his head. "The only duty you have right now is to explain yourself to the judge." The deputies took statements from all of us, and while the two men were allowed to leave with a warning, having been misled by Karen, she was led back to the cruiser for the second time in as many weeks. This time, it wasn't just trespass. They tacked on attempted fraud for falsifying her inspection authority and violating the terms of her probation from the previous incident. The fallout was swift. The HOA board called an emergency meeting to remove her from her position. By the next morning, local social media lit up with news of her arrest, complete with photos of her being walked to the patrol car in that same floral cardigan. Residents who'd been silent for years started posting their own Karen stories, and the sheer volume of complaints caught the attention of a regional investigative reporter. Within days, there was a front-page story titled "Pattern of Abuse: How One HOA Leader Bullied a Community for Years." When her case went to court, she tried everything: stalling tactics, teary speeches about being misunderstood, even claiming the lake deed was forged. But the county archivist brought the original record to court, ink faded but still legible, and the judge wasn't amused. "Mrs. Thompson," he said in a tone that could cut glass, "you've wasted this court's time and harassed a lawful property owner. I'm revoking your probation, fining you for court costs, and ordering you to stay at least 500 feet away from Mr. Miller's land." She sat down heavily, her shoulders slumped, the fight finally draining out of her. The HOA dissolved her seat entirely, stripping her of any influence. The new board issued a public apology for the years of unchecked behavior, promising reforms and community input going forward. A week later, I stood on my dock again, the water calm and glassy under the afternoon sun. Luke came by, setting down a six-pack and handing me a small wooden sign he'd carved himself. In block letters it read, "Private Lake, Private Valley." We hammered it into the shoreline together, both of us laughing at the thought of Karen seeing it from the road. As the wind rustled through the pines, I realized the valley felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. No more surprise confrontations, no more threats of citations, just the sound of the water, the call of the loons, and the steady knowledge that this place was safe again, not because I'd fought for it once, but because I'd made it clear I'd fight for it every time. So what do you think? Was Karen's downfall a fair end to years of bullying? Or should there be stronger penalties for people who abuse community power like she did?